Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. And today we're getting into the topic of actually discussing something that's going on with another influencer channel. It's more like a panel discussion type of channel called Tonight's Conversation, if you've ever come across it. Very similar to some of the content I go over where they're talking about specifically just and only really relationships, but for the most part, it's like a panel of people who talk about different discussions on different relationship topics and whatnot. And it seemed to be a very popular influencer channel, panel, whatever you want to call it. But recently, it seems to have fallen apart because certain people on it have got fired. They started having a lot of issues with like the whole group in general, breaking apart. I'm hearing that some of the main cast or the most influential cast, ones that probably had no negative about them, had left just because of the drama that was going on. And I just kind of wanted to dive into that conversation because of what causes those kind of things, because I've seen this happen a few times where people talk about subjects and at some point later on, especially if they have a group, or maybe even they're individualized, but the truth comes out about them and it kind of tears everything apart. So, yeah, essentially what you hear going on with that is a lot of people who were on there were lying about things that they've gone through, and they're speaking on points of positivity in regards to relationships, yet none of them are living that way. And it started to cause a lot of issues. And I just kind of wanted to address the fact that I feel that this happens when you have people, well, the wrong people giving advice for the purpose of money or come up or just to, be the ones just talking about things, and they don't really love talking about these things. They're not passionate about the actual success of people in these subjects or categories. Like, for example, just better life living, better healthy ways of living, relationships, just, family. They're not genuine about that. They're just doing it because they want to have that come up, maybe make money, or because lately in talking spaces, this has been a very big talking point or category for social media ever since, I would say, roughly about when Kevin Samuels had, was up and doing his thing. And that's why they give him the title, The Godfather of this. And it's like, you got a lot of people who came after that fact, who actually even featured him and, continued that whole kind of renaissance of points being spoken about relationships, the side of it with men and how it connects with women, and just kind of deeper angle of things. But it feels like ever since that you had a lot of surge of phonies who come into this picture, and they really aren't genuine about it. You have a lot of people talking about how to conduct their life and marriage and this and that. Meanwhile, these are people who are running around, they're cheating, they're messing around with a bunch of partners. They're out there just for the hookup culture. And apparently that is what made the Tonight's Conversation, that's the name of the channel, fall apart. In addition to that, it's interesting because it wasn't that long before that you had a channel, I forget the name of the channel. Okay, No Fugazi podcast, who was ran by a guy named Cooley, Cooley, who he was outed as well because he was preaching something and living a different life from it. He was saying that, single moms are for recreational use only, and, do this and that and red pill and all this other kind of stuff. Meanwhile, he was with a white woman. He was a black male. He was with a white woman who had children already from someone else. And he would then try to, after he was outed, he would say, well, my situation is different. I found the exception, which is BS, because then really you should just be preaching that everyone can find the exception instead of going so hard with, this kind of red pill, men need to stay away from single moms. You should have been then preaching single moms, there's a space for that. Maybe guys got to look out and take time to find the right one, but you can find a healthy relationship in that. And I want to preach to you guys that there is positivity in that. That's what he should have been preaching, and it wouldn't have been a problem. But nonetheless, the Tonight's Conversation podcast had a lot of different people on the panel, and apparently a lot of people were very shady. And you had a lot of women were going against each other. You had a man who was in charge of it. He didn't even make himself look like he was the main person in charge, which he was. And I don't know his name, but he apparently was doing shady business deals and stuff like that with the people and trying to run a show in a certain way and trying to sleep with everyone who's on the show. And that is another thing too. You have a lot of people who do that. They speak one way and they preach something different. And that just causes a lot of things to fall apart, but especially when you have multiple hosts or people on your team, it gives more room for things like that to fall apart. What's funny is that I actually recently seen this happen to another guy by the name Destiny, who would preach. He's also a talking points content creator, and he would sometimes speak about relationship stuff, politics, and that. He would have this kind of opposite red pill space where he thought everything should be, typical normal relationship dynamics were not really important. He would always preach that to people as if it was just for the point of making content. But yet his life behind the scenes was falling apart trying to live that way, and he was frustrated with it. In addition, I've seen more content recently showing that that same person now is also living more of a deviant behavior type of lifestyle that they want to keep doing for the purpose of pleasure, which is outside of the realm of some of the things that they might preach on in terms of, why men should be trying to protect themselves from the hookup space culture and try to aim for something more, because he got into some arguing points with other content creators about that kind of stuff. Like, you shouldn't necessarily be trying to protect yourself so much. You should be aiming for, just go with the flow type of thing or something to that effect. And my point is getting a little bit off topic, but the point is that was another person who kind of fell into that space where things were going bad. And you see a lot of people who things like that are going bad. And when you see people who talk in that kind of space that are genuine, people like MTR, Mediocre Tutorial Reviews, for the long point of it, the short end of it is MTR, as he abbreviates it. They talk positive stuff, and then you don't see people like that come into this situation where things fall apart, because what they're preaching is positivity and they're living that positivity. At least from what I've seen so far. I don't know 100%, but from what I see so far, you also had a space of Fresh and Fit, which also became a very popular one that would speak on points about men protecting themselves, but quickly became very toxic in its nature of certain biases towards certain groups, got very nasty with the way it was. And it was no longer about preaching positivity for the protection of males. It just started becoming like a downing women just for the sake of downing women, without preaching why you were trying to avoid these things or the positive spin of it. Okay, like this is what our goal is. It was no longer a goal of trying to create families. It was a goal of just putting down women, putting down certain groups, putting down certain races, putting down certain politic aspects of things. And it just became nasty. And something that a lot of people were following is now falling apart in that as well. So like I said, bringing this full circle back to tonight's conversation, was a podcast that it seemed like it was always very positive, giving all this positive advice. A lot of people would have never realized that it was one of these spaces where it was mostly just a sham. And not to say some of the people on it weren't true. Like there was a guy who goes by the name, I think Trip Fontaine, if I'm saying that right. And for the most part, a lot of people think and feel that he probably was genuine, even though he had a lot of talking points that were a lot of people loved it and thought it was very insightful. He may have genuinely be a true person about his words, but there were a lot of other people on the show who would also speak about positivity and were not living that way in actuality. And that all kind of came to a head recently, where once a lot of the people on the show were taken off the show, they started speaking their truths, and you started seeing that behind the scenes was not as clean or genuine as people would have thought. And like I said, I bring that to the point that this is not just something that happened to that channel. This is happening to a lot of channels and a lot of influencers who are in it for the money, but they're not really there to give you true advice. The advice that they give is good. So I'm not saying that the advice that some of these people give are not sound advice, but the problem is when you're not living that life yourself, it really destroys your credibility and makes other people who are in challenging situations that maybe when you said to them, well, you said out loud and they listened to it and let it hit them as if you were talking to them and felt, well, man, I gotta better myself because this person is talking about me and I feel ashamed of what I'm doing. Then they find out that you're doing those same things. They go, you know what? Nah, maybe the way I was living wasn't that bad and I'm just gonna keep doing it. And then you've now taken a person who could have probably been going on the right path because they learned a lesson from something you were saying to them, and now they just throw it all out the window. It's the equivalent of someone who is, an alcoholic trying to get off of the wagon. I don't know if this term is off the wagon or on the wagon, but if I'm saying it wrong, you get what I'm saying. Trying to get off the wagon and, they find out the person who's telling them all that good advice, they themselves behind the scene as alcoholic. They're going to go, you know what, why am I taking advice from this person? And they're going to seep right back into their old comfortable ways because the person they were listening to is doing it as well. And they're going to say, well, if everyone does it, who cares? Life is short. It is what it is. I don't care. And you have the potential of bringing people right back into that space because the person they trusted was a phony. So I just wanted to kind of dive into that a little bit and point that out because it's just something that's really kind of, besides for that specific thing happening to the tonight's conversation podcast, but just in general relating it to the fact that there is a lot of podcasts and influencers that are falling, I don't want to use the word falling victim to this, but are these kind of perpetrators of false living in relation to what they're preaching. So as always, you guys, be safe, take care, like, share, comment, subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.